Harlan Creech was 74 years old when the phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. A woman from his credit union asked why he'd missed last month's payment on his home equity line of credit. Harlan told her there must be a mistake. He'd never opened a home equity line in his life. She read him the details anyway. $80,000, opened 4 months ago, his signature on file. Harlan thanked her, hung up, and drove straight to the bank. When they showed him the documents, he recognized the handwriting immediately. It wasn't his, but he knew exactly whose it was. His daughter-in-law had been helping with his paperwork since his hip surgery. His son had told him not to worry about the details. Now, Harlan understood why. Harlan Creech built his house in 1972, the same year he married Nadine. He was 22 years old, she was 20, and between the two of them they had about $400 and a whole lot of faith that things would work out. They couldn't afford to hire a crew, so Harlan did the work himself. He'd come home from his day job at the lumber yard, eat whatever Nadine had made on the hot plate in their rented room, and then drive out to the lot they bought on credit. He worked until he couldn't see his hands in front of his face. Weekends, too. 14 months of that, while other young men his age were out at bars and ball games. Harlan didn't mind. Every nail he drove was a promise. Every beam he raised was a future. The day he finished, he drove Nadine out to see it. She stood in the front yard with her hand over her mouth, not saying a word. Harlan carried her across the threshold like they do in the movies, and he told her something he meant with every part of himself. This is where we'll grow old together. And they did. 52 years of life happened inside those walls. They raised Donnie there, argued in the kitchen, made up in the bedroom, sat together on the porch when the evenings turned cool. Nadine's laugh echoed through every room. Her handwriting was still on the recipe cards in the drawer by the stove. Her perfume still lingered in the closet, faint, but there if you knew where to breathe. When she got sick, Harlan took care of her in the bedroom they'd shared for half a century. He held her hand at the end. He buried her in the cemetery 3 miles down the road, close enough that he could visit whenever he wanted. After that, people kept asking if he planned to sell. The house was too big for one person, they said. Too many stairs, too much to maintain. Harlan listened politely and never answered. Leaving that house would be like burying Nadine twice. He wasn't going anywhere. Then his hip gave out, and that's when the trouble started. The surgery was rough. Recovery was worse. For weeks, Harlan couldn't climb the stairs, couldn't drive, couldn't think straight through the fog of pain medication. He felt like a stranger in his own body. The house he'd built with his hands was suddenly full of obstacles he couldn't navigate. That's when Donnie called. His son, who lived 2 hours away and visited maybe twice a year, suddenly wanted to help. He and his wife Meredith would come by, handle the bills, pick up groceries, make sure Harlan didn't fall behind on anything while he healed. Harlan said yes. He said yes because he was tired, because he was hurting, because Nadine would have wanted him to give their son a chance, even after all the years of distance between them. Family helps family. That's what she always believed. So Harlan let them in. He handed over the paperwork. He stopped asking questions when Meredith told him not to worry. He trusted his family. Meredith arrived the next morning with a folder, a smile, and a system. She was organized. Harlan had to give her that. Within a week, she had taken over everything. Bills, bank statements, prescriptions. Everything. She set up a little command center at the kitchen table, sorted his mail into neat piles, and told him she'd handle all of it so he could focus on getting better. Harlan watched her work and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. For months after Nadine passed, he'd been drowning in paper. Bills he forgot to pay, appointments he missed, letters from the insurance company that might as well have been written in another language. Meredith cut through all of it like it was nothing. She was cheerful too, always asking how he was feeling, always bringing him coffee the way he liked it, always finding little ways to make herself useful. She drove him to physical therapy 3 times a week. She picked up his prescriptions without being asked. When Harlan thanked her, she waved it off and said, "That's what family does." Donnie was different. He came by less than Meredith did, and when he showed up, he seemed distracted. He'd sit in the living room scrolling through his phone or stand in the kitchen with his arms crossed like he was waiting for permission to leave. He rarely asked about the surgery. He never asked about Nadine. When Harlan tried to talk about the old days, about the house, about anything that mattered, Donnie would nod along without really listening. Harlan told himself it was just how his son was. Some men don't know how to talk about feelings, doesn't mean they don't care. But there were small things. Harlan noticed he wasn't seeing the mail anymore. Meredith collected it before he could get to the mailbox. When he asked about a bill or a bank statement, she always had an answer ready. Already taken care of. Nothing to worry about. I've got it handled. One afternoon, Harlan asked to see his latest bank statement. Just to take a look, he said. Make sure everything was in order. Meredith smiled and told him she'd bring it by next time, but the next time never came. When he asked again a week later, she said she must have left it at home and promised to bring it tomorrow. Tomorrow came and went. Harlan noticed. He noticed that Donnie always seemed to change the subject when money came up. He noticed that Meredith had started answering questions he hadn't asked, explaining things he hadn't wondered about, filling silences with reassurances that nobody had requested. He noticed, but he didn't act. Because acting would mean believing something he didn't want to believe. It would mean his son, the boy he'd raised in this house, the man he'd hoped would carry on what he'd built, had brought a thief to his door. Harlan wasn't ready to face that. Not yet. So he let it go. He told himself he was being paranoid. He told himself the pain meds were clouding his judgment. He told himself that family doesn't steal from family. He was about to find out exactly how wrong he was. Harlan drove to the bank that same afternoon. He didn't call ahead. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. He'd just got in his truck, the first time he'd driven anywhere in months, and made the 20-minute trip into town with both hands tight on the wheel. The woman at the credit union was polite and patient. She pulled up his account, printed the documents, and spread them across her desk so he could see. A home equity line of credit. $80,000. Opened 4 months ago. His name, his address, his signature at the bottom of every page. Except it wasn't his signature. Harlan had signed his name the same way for over 50 years. He knew the shape of his own handwriting, the way he knew the grain of a piece of oak. The signature on those documents was close. Someone had practiced. But the loop on the H was wrong. The slant was off. Whoever had written this had never held a hammer in their life. He thanked the woman, took copies of everything, and drove home without saying a word to anyone. That night, Harlan sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread in front of him. He thought about Nadine. He thought about the house. He thought about 52 years of building things that lasted, and he made a decision. He wasn't going to confront them, not yet. Harlan had worked in construction his whole life, and if there was one thing he'd learned, it was this: measure twice, cut once. You don't swing a hammer until you know exactly where it's going to land. Anger makes mistakes. Patience builds cases. So Harlan got to work. He found a lawyer in the city who specialized in elder financial abuse. A woman named Paulette Hines who had handled cases like this before and didn't flinch when he told her what his own family had done. She walked him through the process step by step. Document everything. Trust no one. Let them think nothing has changed. Harlan hired a handwriting expert to analyze the forged signatures. The report came back in 2 weeks. The signatures were definitively not written by the account holder. He requested bank records showing where the money had gone. $80,000, transferred in 4 separate payments to an account belonging to Meredith's brother, a man named Dale Furman, who'd been trying to save a failing landscaping business for years. The money was gone. Spent. Harlan would never see a dollar of it again. $80,000. 52 years of work, gone to a man he'd never even met. But he still didn't have proof that Donnie knew. That came on a Sunday afternoon. Donnie and Meredith stopped by to check in, same as always. Meredith made small talk in the kitchen, while Donnie wandered through the house like he was already measuring it for furniture. At some point, Donnie set his phone down on the counter and stepped into the bathroom. A notification lit up the screen, a text from Meredith, and Harlan saw his own name. He didn't think about it. He just picked up the phone. The screen was still unlocked. He scrolled up through the messages, reading fast, his hands steady even as his chest went tight. It's just an advance on the inheritance. He'll never notice. My dad worked his whole life and we got nothing. This is owed to us. Just be more careful with the paperwork. We're almost clear. Harlan read every word. Then he took out his own phone and photographed the entire thread. He put Donnie's phone back exactly where it had been, screen down, same angle. When Donnie came out of the bathroom, Harlan was sitting at the table drinking coffee, looking out the window. "You doing okay, Dad?" Donnie asked. Harlan nodded. "Just fine." Donnie never knew. He walked out that afternoon with his wife, same as always, talking about coming back next weekend, same as always. He had no idea that his father had already seen everything, that the case was already built, that the hammer was about to fall. Harlan had never made decisions in a hurry. Nadine used to tease him about it, said he could take 20 minutes choosing between soup and salad. But the decisions you make slowly are the ones you don't regret. He spent 3 days thinking about the will. He already had one, of course. He and Nadine had written it together years ago with a lawyer in town. Everything split evenly between Donnie and any future grandchildren. Simple, fair, the kind of thing you do when you trust your family to do right by your memory. That trust was gone now. On a Thursday morning, Harlan drove to Paulette Hines's office and told her he wanted to make some changes. She didn't ask why. She didn't need to. She just pulled out a legal pad and started writing. The house would no longer go to Donnie. It would go to strangers. And that was exactly the point. Upon Harlan's death, the property would be transferred to Habitat for Humanity. Every dollar from the sale would go toward building homes for families who needed them, working people, young couples just starting out, the kind of folks who couldn't afford to hire a crew and would have to do the work themselves, just like Harlan had done 52 years ago. Paulette added one more clause at Harlan's request. Anyone who contested the will would receive exactly $1, nothing more. Harlan signed the documents and watched Paulette notarize each page. When it was done, he sat back in his chair and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He thought about Donnie as a boy, running through the hallway, leaving muddy footprints on the floors Harlan had laid by hand, asking 100 questions about how the house was built, then losing interest halfway through the answers. Harlan had always assumed his son would inherit the place someday, that maybe, after Harlan was gone, Donnie would finally understand what it meant, what it took. Now that would never happen. And Harlan found, to his own surprise, that he was at peace with it. He drove home the long way, past the cemetery where Nadine was buried. He didn't stop, but he slowed down as he passed the gate. He thought about what she would say if she could see him now, if she knew what their son had done, what Harlan was doing in return. She would be sad. She would grieve for the son she thought she'd raised, but she would understand. Nadine had always believed in fairness, in consequences, in the idea that people reveal who they are through their choices, and that you have to believe them when they do. Donnie had made his choice. He'd signed his name to it, text by text, lie by lie. Now, Harlan was making his. The house would outlive them all. The walls Harlan had raised with his own hands would come down, and something new would rise in their place. Homes for strangers who would never know his name. Children who would run through hallways built with money that should have gone to a thief. That was enough. That was more than enough. Harlan called Donnie on a Tuesday evening and invited them both to dinner. He said he wanted to talk about the future, about the house, about what comes next. Donnie said they'd be there Saturday at 6. For the first time since Nadine passed, Harlan cooked. He made pot roast the way she used to make it, with carrots and potatoes and onions slow cooked until everything fell apart at the touch of a fork. He set the dining room table with the good china, the plates they only used on holidays. He put out cloth napkins. He lit a candle in the center of the table, the same one Nadine had bought years ago and never burned because she was saving it for a special occasion. This was a special occasion. Donnie and Meredith arrived right on time. Meredith brought a bottle of wine and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Donnie looked uncomfortable, the way he always did in this house, like he was waiting for permission to leave. Harlan welcomed them in. He poured the wine. He served the food. He sat at the head of the table, the same seat he'd sat in for 52 years, and he watched them eat. Meredith did most of the talking. She went on about how well Harlan seemed to be recovering, how glad they were that he was getting back on his feet. Then she shifted, gently, toward the topic she really wanted to discuss. The house was so big for one person. The stairs were a hazard. Had Harlan thought about what might happen if he fell again? Maybe it was time to consider other arrangements. A smaller place, somewhere more manageable. Harlan let her talk. He nodded in the right places. He refilled her wine glass. Donnie barely said a word. He pushed food around his plate and glanced at his phone when he thought Harlan wasn't looking. When the plates were nearly empty, Harlan set down his fork. "I want to tell you both something," he said. Meredith smiled. "Of course, Dad. What's on your mind?" Harlan folded his hands on the table. He looked at his son, then at his daughter-in-law, then back at his son. "I know about the home equity line," he said, "the one you opened in my name 4 months ago, $80,000 against this house." The room went still. Meredith's smile flickered but didn't fall. Donnie's face went pale. "I know about the forged signatures," Harlan continued. "I've had them analyzed by an expert. I know the money went to your brother Meredith. All of it. I've seen the bank records." Meredith opened her mouth to speak, but Harlan held up a hand. "I'm not finished." He let that sit for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He set it on the table and slid it toward Donnie. "I saw your messages. The ones where you told her it was just an advance on the inheritance. The ones where you said I'd never notice." Harlan's voice stayed level, calm, the voice of a man who had already done his grieving. "I photographed all of them. My lawyer has copies." Donnie stared at the phone. He didn't pick it up. Meredith started talking fast. It was a misunderstanding. They were going to pay it back. They were trying to help. They never meant for any of this to happen. Harlan let her finish. Then he shook his head. "I've already filed charges," he said. "Forgery, fraud, elder financial abuse. You'll be hearing from the police." Meredith's face crumbled. Donnie still hadn't said a word. Harlan leaned forward, just slightly, and looked his son in the eye. "You could have just asked me for money," he said. "If you'd come to me and told me you needed help, I would have said yes. I would have given you anything." He paused. "But you didn't want help. You didn't want a gift. You wanted to take. And that's something I can't forgive." Donnie finally looked up. His mouth opened, then closed. He had nothing to say. Meredith grabbed her purse and stood. Donnie followed, moving like a man walking through water. They left without another word. The front door closed behind them, and Harlan was alone. He sat at the table for a long time. The candle burned down to nothing. The food grew cold. Outside, the night settled over the house he had built with his own hands. Then he got up, cleared the dishes, and went to bed. The weeks that followed were quiet. Meredith was arrested on a Wednesday morning. The charges were forgery, fraud, and elder financial abuse. She hired a lawyer and tried to fight it, but the evidence was overwhelming. The forged signatures, the bank records, the text messages. She pleaded guilty 3 months later to avoid a trial. The judge gave her 2 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and an order to pay full restitution. Money she didn't have and would be paying off for the rest of her life. Donnie wasn't charged. Harlan had decided against it, not out of mercy, but because he knew prison wouldn't teach his son anything. Losing everything else would. And Donnie did lose everything. Meredith filed for divorce before her sentencing. She blamed Donnie for everything, for not stopping her, for letting her take the fall, for being too weak to stand up to his own father. Donnie didn't argue. He moved into an apartment on the other side of town and waited for a call from Harlan that never came. There was nothing left to say. Harlan lived 7 more years in the house he built. He never remarried. He never moved. He kept the place up the way he always had, fixing what needed fixing, replacing what wore out. Some mornings, he'd walk through the rooms just to feel the walls under his hands, to remember what it took to raise them. He started volunteering with Habitat for Humanity the spring after the trial. At first, he just showed up to help with framing, simple work, the kind of thing his body still knew how to do even when his mind wandered. But the crew learned fast that Harlan knew more than most of them combined. Before long, he was teaching young volunteers how to hang a door, how to set a foundation, how to build something that would last. He liked those days, the sound of hammers, the smell of sawdust, the feeling of making something good out of nothing. Harlan died at 81 in his sleep, in the bedroom he'd shared with Nadine for 52 years. The hospice nurse found him in the morning, peaceful, his hands resting on his chest. He'd left instructions, a small service, no fuss, buried next to Nadine in the cemetery 3 miles down the road. Donnie didn't come to the funeral. The house sold 6 weeks later. The proceeds, after taxes and fees, came to just over $300,000. Every penny went to Habitat for Humanity. They used it to build 3 homes for families who needed them. A young couple with a baby moved into the first one. Harlan never knew their names, but they were happy, they were grateful. And every night, they slept under a roof that existed because an old man decided his legacy would go to strangers who deserved it instead of a son who didn't. The walls Harlan built came down. Something better rose in their place.